Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the memorial for Richard Deswarte, an occasion organized at record speed to celebrate his life and contribution to our community. I'm delighted to see so many of you here to pay tribute to this extraordinary man whose sudden death has come as a shock to us. I also welcome his family, his friends and colleagues and students who are watching this memorial event online, some of whom are tuning in from Germany, Canada, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. Before we start, I would like to thank the university and our Vice Chancellor David Richardson and PVC Sarah Barrow for their support in organizing this event. Ever since I sent them an email at 8:30 last Monday morning proposing to hold a memorial event on campus, I have received unwavering support. And all parts of the university community have come together, from estates, professional services, security, comms, media suite, colleagues, to catering. They have all pulled together to organize this event really at record speed, so thank you. I would like to remind everyone that to take sensible COVID precautions. We should spread out as much as possible, which you have done, that's great. Wear a mask if that makes you feel more comfortable. As this is a university meeting, we have to have an agenda, of course. So this is just to outline how the memorial event is structured. We will have 4 speeches at the beginning. I will talk on behalf of UEA and the School of History. We'll then have Audrey van der Kolff, Richard's wife, speaking on behalf of Richard's family, followed by speeches from Ramin Kajavarts on behalf of Richard's Tea Club friends, and Andy Jordan on behalf of his circuit and sports friends. After the 4 speeches, we will show a few short pre-recorded video clips from family and friends abroad. And I will then invite anyone who wishes to say something to come forward. So we have a short open mic session. While this is ongoing, I would invite everyone to grab a glass of Prosecco there and come back, because I'm going to bring the speeches part to a close with a toast to Richard. Afterwards, please stay around, share your memories of Richard, meet up with friends, grab a glass, have some nibbles and some of Audrey's famous cake. And we will run a slideshow of pictures of Richard in the background. I'm standing here today, truly heartbroken, as a head of school of a department in grief, as a close colleague of Richard's, as someone who had the privilege to call him a friend. Richard's untimely and unexpected death has left us all devastated. He died far, far too young. As one of his friends put it so aptly a couple of days ago on the Just Giving's page, and this put a teary smile on my face, "This is the only time you have ever been early for something, Richie. And totally the wrong way. And in totally the wrong way." I first met Richard when I came to UA as a PhD student in 2003. And during the final years of my PhD studies, we shared an office. And I encountered his striking Canadian accent that I strangely enough struggled less with than the proper local Norfolk tongue. By the time he had already started a teaching career at UEA, that would last 20 years. Richard had many unique talents, one of which was to turn any job that should take 20 minutes into a half-day adventure. He was hands down the most generous and passionate teacher I've ever met, someone who had an extraordinary skill to convey his enthusiasm to his students, who was always genuinely interested in their individual intellectual journeys, ready to listen, ready to support, ready to instill them with the confidence to pursue their dreams. And this applied to his colleagues too. We all witnessed the small, kind gestures on a daily basis. He would always stop to ask students and colleagues alike how they were doing, would listen with genuine interest, and offer support, as well as some of Audrey's home-baked treats. One student remarked to me in an email this week or last week that he has been thinking a lot about how often he would see him work late at night, and Richard liked to work late and rise late the next day. He wrote, whenever I was heading home from a long study session in the library or a social event at the student bar, I would frequently look up at the arts building and see the light of his office, as he was undoubtedly working hard on prep work for his students. The sight of his office light always gave me a feeling of calm as I waited for my bus. The fact that these small details and memories have become fixated in my mind all day is a clear testament to how much of a presence he left at UEA." End of quote. Richard's selflessness and dedication to provide constructive feedback on written work to everyone who asked for it, often exceeding the length of the piece itself, that was famous, came at a price. As he always went the extra mile for his students and colleagues, his own projects progressed more slowly. But Richard was an excellent scholar and an incredibly smart historian. He never finished his PhD, and this bugged him. We talked about this 2 weeks ago when we were sitting over there on the bench on the square after our school away day, and we talked about our plans for the next few years. He was determined to complete his PhD by publication, and it really saddens me that this won't happen now. That said, when I was thinking about our conversation, it struck me that one of the most important things that Richard taught me and many of his peers is that in academia we should never allow ourselves to be defined by our titles, by the number of our pure entries or some bizarre Scopus metrics. Richard's teaching and research expertise covered a wide range of topics in modern German and European history. He was particularly interested in the complicated relationship between Britain and Europe, Americanization, and the idea of Europe in the 20th century. He was a long-standing member and passionate contributor to the International Research Network on the history of the idea of Europe, and a co-founder of the Institute for the Study of Ideas of Europe here at the School of History. Amongst Richard's publications are an essay on Americanization and the idea of Europe in the 1920s, and a highly praised chapter on the World War I political cartoonist Louis Remakers and his conception of Europe. Most recently, Richard was working on an article exploring questions of European modernity and interwar perceptions of the Soviet Union and the United States. In addition to this, Richard researched in the fields of history and computing, digital history, digital humanities, and web archives. He was the co-convener of the Institute of Historical Research Digital History Seminar series. He contributed to his discipline in so many different ways. The incredible energy with which Richard approached all his tasks was often powered by homemade cake, of course, Walker's Crisp, and smoothies. He liked to stack up the empty smoothie plastic cups in his office, on his office desk, and many of us were joking about this for a long time. He was undeterred. He kept piling them up. A handful of us went into his office last week, and we counted an incredible 119 smoothie cups with assorted plastic straws, now banned. If Richard had lived longer, this would have surely become a major obstacle to the implementation of the campus development plan and our timely move to the registry next spring. Maybe this was his plan. Richard was truly a man of habits. He loved his routine, whether in terms of his daily exercise or his afternoon visit to the Union shop to buy the very last copy of The Guardian, just before it was taken out of circulation. I hardly ever saw him reading it, certainly not before the end of a normal workday when I headed home. So Richard must have been a real lover of old news. Now I'm sure you will all agree with me on the fact that cake featured quite big in Richard's life. Not so much the baking, that's Audrey's talent, of course, but the sharing of it. Richard was living proof of the power of cake to bring people together. And the School of History is internally indebted to his wife Audrey for ensuring a ready supply of these delicious treats. Many of us on floor 4 leave their office doors open, not because of an open door policy, but because we knew at least once a day, each afternoon, we would hear Richard go to the kitchen, his distinct Canadian voice filling the corridor with cheerful hellos, only to pop into each office on the way back, handing out homemade slices of cake from a plastic container, spreading a little bit of joy each day. It is difficult to accept we will never again hear Richard's distinct voice echoing on floor 4. My colleague Richard Mills described it as warm in the article he put together for the EDP, earning him the accusation of posthumous historical revisionism from Ardrey. Warm might not have been the right word, but it was certainly wonderfully distinct. It deserved its very own adjective. Having grown up in the ice hockey mad environment of Alberta, where children often learn to skate before they walk, upon arrival in East Anglia, Richard quickly realized that the Canaries were the only proper football team in the region, and he adopted them and his team. He would get to Carrow Road as often as possible each season, always arriving just before kickoff, rushing to chain his bike to the fence before the whistle blew. In yellow and green footballing terms, it struck me this week when I was reflecting on Richard's character and unwavering work ethic. He was the Alex Tatty of the School of History. And some of you may need to Google Alex Tatty later on. An absolute team player, collective spirited, always loyal, always positive, and ready to contribute with a broad smile. Like Tatty, he tackled every issue head on. And like Tatty, these tackles were occasionally rather late. As one of my colleagues remarked earlier this week, Richard was the thread that bound us together as a community of learners. He will leave a huge gap. He will leave a huge void. He touched so many lives during his time at UEA. Richard was the epitome of kindness, collegiality, and dedication. He personified UEA at his very best. The day before his sudden death, Richard was in my office, and we were talking about the Canaries' prospect for the upcoming premiership season. We were looking forward to returning to Carrow Road's terraces. And over the last few years, I've often stood there with Richard shoulder to shoulder in the lower Barclays, seeing some of the late Norwich legends being given a tribute with a minute of applause. I always liked that way of acknowledging the special contribution these men in yellow and green had made to their club. So let's pay tribute to our friend, to our colleague, to our teacher. Let's celebrate his life and contribution to our university. Let's cheer and clap and lift the clouds over us by giving Richard a minute of applause. Richard, you were and you will always remain a UEA legend. Thank you. I should have brought a whistle to signal the end of the minute. I now invite Ardrey, Richard's wife, to address us.
Well, I've long suspected that Richard used my cakes to gain popularity. And looking around me today at the sheer volume of people who've turned up, I think it's safe to say that it did work. Thank you all for coming. It is marvellous to see you all here, and he would have just loved being here, going from person to person, laughing, smiling, enjoying himself. as usual, I would have had to drag him away at the end of the evening. There's some here who have come a very long distance at very short notice, and to you I'm particularly grateful. Of course, there's a lot of people who really should be here and really important in Richard's life, who couldn't be here due to international travel restrictions. That's one bad thing about international families like ours. It's great for cultural diversity and cheap holidays, I have to admit, but it's terrible at times like these when you can't be together, especially when there's a pandemic raging. So I'm thinking in particular of Richard's mother, Sheila, in Canada, and his sister, Sonia, and her family in New Zealand. They would have loved to have been together and be here. There's also my family and close friends in South Africa and further afield. And there's Richard's two most longest standing friends, Marty in Sweden and Craig in Australia, who can't be with us today, as are Richard's cousins, very beloved Belgian cousins, his aunt Marie-Claire and his uncle and godfather André in Brussels. However, thanks to modern technology, they are actually joining us live today, except Marty, who's in the north of Sweden, fishing and cloudberry picking. It sounds very nice, but there's no internet access, so he will listen to it later because it's being recorded. So they're here in spirit, if not in person. Sadly, there's no cake and brownies for them afterwards, but hey. I am deeply grateful to UEA for making this space available to us today, not only because it gives us an external COVID-friendly place where we can celebrate Richard's life, and in particular, thank you for not throwing any bureaucratic obstacles in our way. Thank you, Matthias. You've been a star sorting it out, as well as Chris Jones doing all the technical stuff. But the reason I'm particularly pleased that it's happening right here in the heart of UEA is because UEA was Richard's spiritual, intellectual and emotional home in so many ways for 30 years. As you all said, he spent many long hours here in his office, in the sports park, in many of the eateries with friends and colleagues setting the world to right. He was here till very late, most nights, to the point that it became a standing joke between us that UEA was the other woman in his life. What I remember in particular is during the first severe lockdown, when we were only allowed one walk a day, we would sometimes come here to walk around the Broad, and we would lock our bicycles up at the registry. And Richard would stand there like a lovesick teenager, staring up at his office like the object of his desire that he couldn't get close to. And that was very painful to him. And then as soon as he found a door, maybe you should close your ears, Matthias, but as soon as he found a door where he could surreptitiously sneak in, he would go back to his office allegedly to access teaching material, which in his head constituted a legitimate reason to travel to work. I think in all the years that I've known Richard, that was probably the only time that he bent or broke a rule. He was far too Canadian and law-abiding for that. The memory that's been coming back to me quite often over the last week was when Richard first came to meet my family and friends in South Africa, when he came out there to meet us in 1990. It's fair to say that Richard was not the typical South African male at the time then, or I suppose now. First of all, and please make a point later of watching these screens so you can see Richard in his heyday in the 80s and the 90s. Firstly, he had shoulder to waist length hair, rather unkempt. He was emaciatingly skinny, about a quarter of the size of the average rugby playing member of my family. He his glasses broke on the flight down to South Africa, so he used an elastoplast to fix the arm on it. And as for his dress sense, I think you'd have to describe it as effortlessly and authentically grunge. He was, all his T-shirts, the print of his T-shirts were all completely washed off. And again, when you watch the photos, you'll see the same T-shirts reappear over a very long period. He also had Canadian flags sewn onto all his clothes in weird places, which I first thought was the typical thing that Canadians do of saying to the world, I'm not American, even though my accent may be mistaken for one. But actually in his case, it was to hide all the holes and rips and tears that, that were forming. His clothes were genuinely threadbare. And Richard was a very early adopter of the reuse, recycle, what's the other one, never throw out policy. He simply couldn't throw anything out, as Matthias said, whether that was smoothie cups, old trainers. We have a cellar full of Guardians from the Gordon Brown years, if any of you are interested. He simply couldn't, he just couldn't throw anything out. So to say that I was apprehensive about introducing this man to my family, very intimidating and traditional, is probably an understatement. Well, I needn't have worried, because he won them over, as he did everyone, with his kindness, just by being himself, gentle, interested in people. Although I think my mother's attempts at feeding him up and him gamely going along with it, and him laughing heartily at my father's excruciatingly corny jokes probably did help too. But by the end of that first visit, my father used two words to describe Richard, which I always thought was very apt. One was decent and one was gentleman. And I think they got the essence of him pretty quick. And then I introduced him to the rest of my family and friends, and everyone just fell in love with Richie, as he so good-humouredly allowed them to call him. The thing with Richard is he was just such a genuinely likeable guy. He was just nice in the best possible sense of that word. Everyone liked him, everyone wanted to be around him, everyone wanted to spend time with him. He made people feel good about themselves. He made them be the best versions of what they could be. I think a lot of that stemmed from Richard's genuinely good fortune of being born into a stable, happy, uncomplicated family who just gave him a lot of support and unconditional love and let him pursue whatever he wanted to do. And that gave him enough self-assurance and emotional groundedness that he could, with other people, simply give. And he didn't need to take a lot back in return. That's quite an unusual thing to have. 2 pages on. Richard had a very unique ability to bring people together. He always formed networks around himself. That was at first here at the School of European Studies, later at the School of History, and then at sport. You know, he was at the heart of circuits, park run, Ange Wednesday's posse, the Oak Tree Group, the Norwich City supporters, our family, his family. He was just always in the middle of it, but not by drawing attention to himself and putting himself in the limelight, but by actually allowing the light to shine on other people. He loved nothing better than other people doing well, and he took sheer pleasure in seeing people go places and do well. Nothing gave him more pleasure than seeing one of his undergraduate students becoming a postgraduate student and then getting a job, preferably in academia and preferably at UEA, like Chris. And he just reveled in other people's successes. He spent a lot of time with students dealing with their problems, sometimes too much as far as I was concerned, but especially the ones that were struggling, he would always go the extra mile and help them. He would write really lengthy and thoughtful references, and his essay comments were legendary long, as we've said earlier. He knew that a lot of students probably didn't read it, but he persevered in the knowledge that someone somewhere would take notice of it and the next essay would be better, and eventually they may become a better academic. So that was Richard. His courteous and inclusive nature actually belied a very, very strong sense of moral values. He was never pushy with it, but Richard had a strong moral compass by which he lived his life, and he never deviated from that. For instance, he was actively involved in the trade union, and he was on the picket line in all weathers for UCU, probably always late, but probably always making up with a cake of something and a big smile. He's also politically engaged. He was a socialist, keen on issues of social justice, equality in society. Richard was also an ardent European. Not only did that stem from an intellectual interest in it, but he was also emotionally, due to his background, very much European. His father was Belgian, his mother was English, a proud Yorkshire woman. He lived with me in Germany for 4 years, and his identities as a Canadian, a European, and a Brit sat very comfortably alongside each other. There was never any conflict there. Richard was also fighting the good fight against grade inflation and an erosion of standards in academia to the bitter end, against the odds, swimming against the tide, but he did it. And I feel I should take this opportunity to apologize to generations of students. He was a very hard marker. Can't say any more than that. One thing you may not know about Richard is that the sport that he practiced in Canada before he came here for his postgraduate studies was fencing, saber fencing. And in fact, his nephew Ross was selected for the New Zealand under-20s team, and he stayed with us when he was competing in Newcastle. And Richard was very proud that that tradition was being continued. Now, I found it a particularly strange choice of sport for somebody such a team player and so sociable, because it's quite a lonely activity. But then I spoke to his mother after he passed away, and she said at the age of 12, Richard, out of the blue, announced to her and his father that he wanted to learn the use of the saber, the old thrusts of the sword in defense of virtue. He wanted to learn it not so much as a weapon, but as a way of protecting the weak and the vulnerable. That, of course, stemmed from his interest in history, but also a fascination with chivalry. His parents were lucky enough to enlist a retired army Russian soldier, very old school, who taught Richard a lot of discipline, mind over body, and the values of chivalry. I don't think he managed to teach him to be on time, but let's just put that to one side. I've been thinking since his mother told me that this week, that I wonder if some of those characteristics that we know and love so much about Richard, his magnanimity, his courteousness, his complete lack of ego, were not honed during those years of learning how to use the fencing, the saber. I don't know if you know, but Richard was born 3 weeks late, 3 weeks after his official due date. That makes sense, doesn't it? He also didn't start speaking until he was nearly 3. Now, various tests of his hearing and cognitive abilities revealed that actually he had no impairment. He was just taking his time. And that set the tone for his whole life, where he was doing things in his own time. Sometimes in exasperation, I would say to him, for goodness sake, Richard, come along. You're going to be late for your own funeral. I'm afraid I was wrong. For the most important appointment in his life, Richard was far too early. Rest in peace, my love.
Hello, everyone. Like all of us, I'm privileged to call Richard my friend. In my case, for almost 30 years. For virtually as long as I have lived in Norwich, he was my mentor, a selfless, calm, constant, nurturing our relationship and never losing touch. It was always a pleasure to encounter him. He even secured my unlikely membership of the informal tea club of scholars at UEA, here at UEA, that were his friends, despite me never having been an academic. It was typical of Richard that when he told me a few weeks ago that he was seeing a doctor about his cough and about his heart, he apologised for troubling me and was more interested in my trivial little niggles. It's very appropriate that this proud Canadian, son of Yorkshire and of Belgium, whose extended family Audrey and Matthias have just explained spans the globe, should settle here in Norwich, because he epitomised so many of the qualities of this fine city and enriched them all. Norwich, we know, is a city of strangers, and Richard and Audrey, as strangers themselves, always provided a warm welcome and generous hospitality to all of us. Richard cared. We will all recall times that Richard celebrated, as Audrey's just explained, any of our very limited achievements, privileging them before his and proudly articulating to all who would listen why those accomplishments were richly deserved. Enhancing our lives, of course, did have consequences, as we have heard, most notably on Richard's unique and legendary concept of time. Up before the crack of noon, he maintained a punishing 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. office hour at UEA 7 days a week. And of course, we could reliably set our watches by his fashionable lateness for absolutely everything. We didn't mind, of course. We all knew the truth behind his lack of punctuality. That flurry of last-minute emails he was dashing off, and the dozens of friends he had met and ex-students he had met en route to spend a few precious minutes to catch up with them. No gathering, no wedding, no anniversary was complete without Richard. He was always the first to greet you and the last to say goodbye. Unsurprisingly, he was truly in his element as the most attentive of hosts, especially at the infamous, renowned summer barbecues and Christmas parties. The only problem was that by the end of an absolutely lovely evening, full of Audrey's lovely cooking, you realised that Richard had been so busy ensuring that all his guests were well watered and fully fed and had a doggy bag that you barely saw or spoke to him. This remains a small cosmopolitan city, and Richard richly contributed to our sense of community. The merest hint of a problem or crisis, and Richard had not only come up with a solution, but was the first to volunteer to solve it. At one stage, he was helping so many of us move around the country, he must have considered setting up a sideline as Richard's removals, payment naturally being in half bananas. The residents of Trinity Street never found out how deep the snow fell because Richard was always there, a true son of North America, clearing it all up before it had time to lay. And when faced with the dark side of city life, Richard managed to find positivity even there. When, to his surprise, he was the victim of a mugging a few years ago at the centre of the city, he delighted in apprehending his pair of assailants, who were half his age, tackling them to the floor, following a mile-long chase, and personally taking them to the police station. Like this city of stories, Richard had a way with words. But as with all things, he was incredibly modest about this remarkable talent, except on one occasion. In the wee small hours following one of our tea club gatherings, Audrey woke Richard to clarify something he had uncharacteristically perhaps misspoken. Referencing the film classic When Harry Met Sally, Audrey asked, "What do you mean I'm high maintenance?" Wiping the sleep from his eyes, as quick as a flash, Richard replied, "You may be very high maintenance because you're very high performance." And thus, marital harmony was restored. Of course, Richard himself combined very low maintenance with exceedingly high performance. Richard was a man of many gifts. He could nurse a pint for upwards of 3 hours. He wrote some of the longest emails and texts in existence, all at all hours of the night. But above all, he was a committed and loyal friend and a committed and loyal teacher. He loved people and he was truly loved. And that's why all of us are here today. Of all his many interests, film, football, first editions, it was his collection of friends and students and colleagues that meant most to him, and of course means most to us. He lived doing what he loved most, spreading joy to and educating thousands, making us all feel special and contributing to create a happier world. We're all blessed to have had the privilege of knowing Richard Deswarte. His legacy will continue in all of us. And of course, we will continue to support Audrey and her family forevermore. Thank you.
I think anyone that knew Rich, and many did, will know straight away that he was incredibly sports mad. And I mean really, really sports mad. On any average day of the week, he could be found either at the sports park or walking to the sports park or walking back from the sports park. And that's the only things that he did in the week. At the weekend, he would also engage in sport. A typical Saturday morning for Rich was completing the park run, not necessarily always the fastest, but often the loudest. And then when he'd done that, he would then cycle to the sports park, complete a whole round of Pilates, body balance and other things, and then cycle home. He was truly sports mad. The other things he did were triathlons, marathons, half marathons. If he wasn't in the sports park, he was running around the sports park or running around the track. I think right at the beginning, I think, Adri, you mentioned the oak tree circuits. And I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the oak tree circuits because I think it really provides an interesting insight into Rich and really what made him tick, and also why many of us, including me now, really, really miss him. But first of all, circuits. It's probably not something that many of you have ever participated in. Circuit training involves the completion of a series of exercises timed in a certain period of time, things like squat thrusts, burpees, sit-ups, things like that. But the king of the circuit activities is, yes, the Ono. And I've actually got somebody here to demonstrate an Ono to you. So here's V, my partner in crime. So when you're in your own time, one Ono, please. So a press up, 2 squat thrusts, and a star jump. So quite a tour de force. Now Rich would regularly perform 30 or 40 of these Onos. You might wonder why they're called Onos. In the Marine Corps, they're called something a lot ruder. But 30 or 40 of these in a regular session. And one of the things that an institution I think that Rich created was at the end of the regular circuit sessions, he would actually urge us all to do an extra 20 or 21 of these Onos. So he was always pushing everyone slightly harder. Now, you're probably thinking at this stage, you know, what an awful way to spend a lunchtime. And to be honest, they are quite a boring thing to do, circuits, but it's also a really good way of getting away from work, getting away from your computer, finding out what other people are doing across the campus. And I strongly believe that actually listening to what the other speakers have said, I think that for Rich was very much the purpose. He was very interested in finding out about what other people did on the campus. And actually the circuits group and the broader group network of people that operated in and around the sports park provided him with those connections. I think for more than 20 years, actually, Rich was the kingpin of the circuits group. On Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays and Fridays, he would regularly be there. If he wasn't there, he'd be urging other people to go. I think what's really interesting, though, about Rich is that, unlike many other people who are so full of energy, he was never really competitive. It was never a competitive exercise for him. It was actually about encouraging other people. I mean, new people that would arrive, he would warmly welcome them. He would provide advice on technique, urge them to come again. He would also be equally kind and welcoming to the sports park staff. I can see actually some of them at the back there. He would always be providing critical feedback to them, perhaps not long pages of it, but he would also critically engage with them. When one of them left, as many of them unfortunately did do, he would organize a card and a collection. So he did value very much their role. And for old hands like myself, he pushed us hard. If he thought we were slacking, he would push us that extra mile. He would offer encouragement, and of course, he would offer every now and again cakes. And then, sadly, COVID hit. And our sort of circuits group, which would have been a very happy group, suddenly ground to a halt. And for a number of weeks, we kind of felt, I think, a little bit lost. Some of us turned to Joe Wicks and quickly realized that Joe Wicks was no substitute to Rich. We gradually, as a group, began to move online. We developed a WhatsApp group. We learned how to put on circuits for ourselves. And Rich was very much at the heart of that. I mean, he had the infrastructure. He had the knowledge of the contacts. He had the knowledge of people's telephone numbers. He knew who was around, who could be encouraged to join the group. And slowly, before our eyes, Rich, the participant, began to morph into Rich, the exercise consultant, or at least the leader of the exercise of the group, we began to realize that the exercises became harder. We realized that the rest periods began to become slightly shorter. Over time, as the lockdown began to ease, we moved up to the oak tree. And the oak tree in question is the one that's the other side of the Porter's Lodge. It's a really old oak tree. It's the one surrounded by trunks arranged in a circle. And we began to meet there. It was a fantastic opportunity to get away from our home offices, to have a sense of normality when everything in life was suddenly turned upside down. Rich began, I think, to dream up new exercises. So along with the Ono, there came the press jack, the Spider-Man plank, the Russian twist, the power jack, and perhaps most typically of all, the ice skater. I won't ask you, V, to demonstrate any of these. It would take too long. And then, of course, there were the cakes. Oh, my goodness, there were the cakes. There were brownies, there were muffins, there were lemon cakes, there were sausage rolls. We were never entirely, they came in Tupperware boxes, in metal boxes. We were never entirely sure whether people were turning up for circuits because of the circuits or because of your cakes. Although we did joke very often to one another that if we didn't do the circuits when we turned up, we'd all be as big as Michelin men and women. So we'll miss Rich, and we'll also miss, sadly, your cakes too. So what have I learned? What have we learned about Rich over the last 20 to 30 years? Well, I think in life there are leaders and there are followers. And it seems to me that Rich definitely wasn't one of life's followers. He knew where he wanted to go in life. He knew what he wanted to change. And he was actually remarkably determined in going about achieving change. But he also wasn't a leader. He wasn't a leader in the conventional sense of somebody who's out in front, who's shouting at everybody else to follow them and demanding their compliance. I think I realised, and I think many others realised, that actually as a group we were being led by Rich from within the group. And that to me seemed to be the essence of the man. I think for many of us, the oak tree was really, really important. When we first received the news of his untimely passing, that was the place we went to on Sunday. I'm not quite sure why we went there, but it was just the obvious place to go. For a long time, Richard even integrated some of the features of the oak tree into his exercise regime. I will always remember him, for example, stretching up against a tree or doing some kind of exercise on the trees that surrounded it. In history, let's come back to history, oak trees are worshipped because they're very long-lasting, very important, very long-living species. And I began last week to look into this oak tree up there, and I didn't realize quite how old it is. It's apparently 22 feet in circumference. It suggests, therefore, that it's somewhere between 500 and 600 years old. And just to put that into historical perspective, and I better watch my P's and Q's here, given the audience, it means that it was probably germinated sometime around 1500, around the time of Henry VII. And some have argued that it's not just one of the oldest trees on campus, that it's possibly one of the oldest living organisms in Norwich. And it therefore seems most fitting and most symbolic that we remember Rich by a historian, by associating with him with such a long-lasting and still existing thing. So I think for many of us, when we miss Rich, and many of us are missing Rich, and I think we'll continue to miss Rich, we will go to the oak tree because it's such, I think, an important symbol to us of such a kind, such a passionate, such a humane, and such an empathetic man. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sonia, Richard's sister. Thank you for being here today to celebrate Richard's life. Whilst this isn't how anyone would want to celebrate a loved one's life, I'm grateful that technology has enabled us to be here together. And after having done hundreds of Zoom meetings over the last 18 months, it hasn't been quite so daunting. And anyway, I know you all know how it feels to be up on a big screen. My mum, Sheila, and I are truly honoured to have had Richard as a son and brother, and are also in awe of the person he was. Reading all the Twitter tributes and the newspaper article, I can see he touched many people and truly made life better, and often with cake. We'd like to give you a glimpse of Richard's youth and the experience that shaped him into the wonderful man that he became. Our parents emigrated to Canada, our mother from England and our dad from Belgium. Richard was born in Quebec City, and our family moved west to Alberta and settled in Edmonton, where I was born. We were very fortunate as children to travel to England to visit our grandparents, and Belgium to visit our aunts and uncles and cousins. On these holidays, we would spend many hours visiting historical sites and buildings, and Richard would pore over the lead soldiers, carefully choosing one to add to his prize collection. I can remember sitting in the pews at Westminster Abbey with my grandmother, very patiently, or not so patiently when you're 6, waiting for my brother to finish looking through all of the crypts and exploring every nook and cranny. You wouldn't be able to do it today, but in the 70s, Richard had purchased a World War I bayonet at a flea market in London and a toy rifle from Harrods, and he brought them home as cabin luggage. I remember the air hostesses poring over him, teasing him about whether the rifle was real or not. And I was quite disappointed because I had a wonderful life-size toy chimpanzee that no one was paying any attention to. Richard was able to read from a very early age and had a great love for books and knowledge. He had a pile of books he kept by his bed and would read late into the night as he pored through each one of them. Wherever he travelled, he always went to at least one bookstore, and books often featured as gifts to us at Christmas and birthdays. We didn't necessarily love every one of his choices, but we do know they were hand-picked and thoughtfully purchased for us. We had a wonderful childhood and had many neighbourhood and school friends, particularly Glenn and Gary, who lived across the street. We spent our summers playing hide and seek up and down the neighbourhood, and only to be called in as it started to get dark. We would walk to the local theatre on a Saturday to watch the matinee, and if we arrived late, we'd have to sit on the floor at the very front of the theatre. We would take the bus to the university, as at that time that was the only place you could play pinball and arcade games, and ride our bikes to the outdoor pool. Nearly every summer our family would travel to Vancouver Island to spend time with the Boyds, and on the way back we would stop in at Penticton for about a week, where Richard and I would spend hours swimming and diving in the motel pool and getting sunburnt down at the lake. -30 and snow in the winter didn't stop us from playing outside, where we would build snow fortresses, have snowball fights, tobogganing, cross-country skiing and skating. And I can remember walking together to school in winter blizzards and racing toothpicks as little rivers formed on the street as the snow began to melt in spring. Richard played baseball in the summer and ice hockey in the winter, and when he was 12, he took up fencing, being coached in sabre by an old-school Russian army officer who, as you can imagine, was very strict and expected 100% commitment. Richard fenced throughout his high school and university years, competing at many events, including the Canadian University Games in Montreal. Richard took up running and cycling in later years, and as you may or may not know, he had quite the collection of running shoes. Whenever he'd buy a new pair, he could never part with the old, and he kept several pairs at my mum's house in Edmonton and also in South Africa. He just couldn't bear to throw an old pair out. From a young age, Richard was set on a career in the armed forces, and at 13 he joined the Sea Cadets. And it's bizarre to think we even had Sea Cadets, considering Edmonton's in the middle of the prairies. and I'm not sure how they were able to simulate being at sea. Richard made many good friends with cadets, including lifelong friend Marty, with whom he'd spend the summers sailing a dinghy at Sylvan Lake and skiing in the Rockies in the winter. Richard attended summer camps on Vancouver Island, learning survival skills, and in later years leading and mentoring young cadets at the camp. Through Sea Cadets, Richard was chosen to spend 6 weeks sailing the Caribbean on a historic tall ship, climbing the rigging and masts, and learning traditional sailing and navigating skills. After high school, Richard joined the Canadian Navy, completing officer training on the East Coast and returning to the naval base in Edmonton to begin an engineering degree. Richard left the Navy because his eyesight wasn't good enough for him to be able to perform active duty as a submariner engineer. He decided to take a break from his engineering degree and went to Belgium to stay with family for 3 months. He returned back to Edmonton fairly fluent in French, and much to our dad's disdain, sporting long hair after many years of a short sides and back haircut. After graduating with a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Alberta, Richard left for London to work and travel. And being the annoying little sister, I wasn't far behind and turned up in London a few months later. Richard settled into a typical flat in London, living above a hairdresser's with Kiwis and Aussies. Here he met another lifelong friend, Craig, with whom he would plan an ambitious and challenging trip driving through Russia and Eastern Europe. Richard met his soulmate Audrey in Heidelberg, and over the years we've had many lovely family holidays together, both in New Zealand and Canada. Richard was an amazing uncle and had a special connection with Ross and Bridget, and even though there were often many years in between seeing each other. As we know, Richard had quite a sweet tooth, and on one family ski holiday he introduced my kids to his version of Scroggin, 90% Smarties and chocolates and only 10% fruit and nuts. Searching through boxes of memorabilia, I came across some cards that Richard had written to me whilst I was living in London, and it was wonderful to be reminded of our close relationship and the support and love we had for each other. I must have been pretty okay on the sister front, as Richard thanked me numerous times in these cards for doing his washing, sending him money, organising application forms, and completing all sorts of menial tasks for him. What I do know is that Richard did okay on all fronts. As a son, a brother, husband, brother-in-law, uncle, friend, mentor, and teacher. You're loved more than you will ever know, and will forever remain in our thoughts and in our hearts.
Hello, my name is Willem. I'm Richard's brother-in-law, and I was asked to say a few words on behalf of the family. I was 17 when I met Richard for the first time. More than 30 years have since passed. In all this time, he was part of our family and of my life. Now, my sister Audrey was then and remains today a truly remarkable woman. As a result, I was quite curious to see who she would bring home. I must say and confess, I was slightly bemused when I first met Richard. I, as Audrey's younger brother, towered over him. He was so small and slender. He was unassuming. Next to Audrey, he seemed understated. But that's the first thing about Richard. He was self-assured, and he did not feel the need to impress anybody. He lived by his own inner scorecard and exuded a quiet but tangible gravitas. From that time on, and over the course of the next 3 decades, he endeared himself to me and to our entire family in endless ways. He remained unassuming throughout, but always impressive. We were blessed to get to know him well, and as we got to know him well, all the wonderful attributes which he possessed increasingly shone through. In a eulogy, you don't often find negative references to the departed. We make it a point to refrain from saying anything negative. With Richard, I'm in the unique and privileged position that I cannot think of anything negative to say, as I do not have a single memory or incident which involved him, which wasn't positive, endearing, or heartwarming. That, in and of itself, says quite a bit about who he was. If I were asked to describe Richard, I would use words like solid, stable, consistent, and reliable. In short, he was a rock and an anchor, someone I would gladly have on my team and with whom I'd go to war. He was loyal to a fault, although he was not blind to the faults of the ones he loved. He was well-mannered, humane, and kind. His kindness could, however, not be mistaken for weakness. In that wiry body of his, he had cords of iron and a heart as big and as brave as a lion's. He was committed and determined. With Richard, you knew where you stood. There were never any mind games. He was straight as a die. He looked for and found the good in people. He assumed positive intent. He was wise and always did the right thing. I think Richard embodied what integrity means. The famous Afrikaans poet Langenhoven wrote, and I freely translate, "Give me the man that will do what is right when the judge is away. The man who speaks the truth when all hell breaks loose and remains true to his conscience, even if he gets punishment instead of reward." For me, that summarizes a part of Richard's character. I think the Jewish word mensch aptly describes him. He was secure enough in himself that he was able to allow the light to shine on others. He connected people. For a good reason, people trusted him and liked him. He was not ego-driven. Quite the contrary, he often put his own self-interest and ambition second to the interest of others. He had a wicked sense of humor, and he took great joy when his beloved canaries, whom he supported so passionately, slayed the giants, as he once described it to me. To Charlene and Lehandri, he was a steady father figure. Hardly could not have asked for a better husband, nor I or my sisters for a better brother-in-law. My parents loved him like a son. So did his own family. I'm sure you here present today have had similar experience with him. You could probably not have asked for a better friend, colleague, teacher. I want to draw to a close with two quotations. The first is a rework of the famous poem by Lawrence Binyon. "He shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary him, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember him." Finally, now that he is with us no longer, all that we admired and loved in Richard will become even more apparent and clear. As Khalil Gibran said, "When you part from your friend, you grieve not, for that which you love most in him be clearer in his absence, as the mountain to the climber is clearer from the plain." I apologize for saying so much, but my love for Richard left it difficult to say any less. I am so privileged to have known him and to honor him today with these words in remembrance of a human being so fine as him. I thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Craig Shepley. You like the part that I actually had to read that part? Richard liked the fact that I had to read what my name was. I live in Brisbane, Australia, and I've had the great good fortune and honour to call Rich one of my best friends that I could possibly have ever hoped to have for the past near 35 years. Rich was my go-to man for questions historical, political, and I greatly appreciated his opinion for questions personal. He is godfather to my son, and he's a friend in life that is always in your head. He's the friend that you always have that conversation with in your head because you enjoy talking to him and because you enjoy his company so much. Rich came into my life as a skinny, long-haired 23-year-old straight off the plane from Canada. We were flatmates living in London, and very quickly a friendship which was to become lifelong developed. He was a wonderful conversationalist, and we would sit up for hours into the night talking. And it was during one of these conversations that he told me he wanted to drive from London to the Soviet Union. I didn't even know that that was allowed, but I had a car and I was definitely in. And so the summer of 1989, the summer and spring of 89, we spent about 5 months travelling the Western Russia, Soviet Union, and Turkey, and most of the Eastern Bloc countries. For me, that remains one of the highlights of my youth. But one of the reasons that that trip remains one of the highlights is not just because of the incredible places that we saw and the experiences that we had. It was because I made those experiences with Rich. I spent many nights enthralled by his knowledge of European history, his deep philosophical intellect, and his questioning and inquiring mind. And most importantly, he laughed at all my jokes. He was a perfect travelling companion, and I love to make Rich laugh. There are many stories from that trip, but I'd like to quickly try and share just a couple with you because they give a little insight into aspects of Richard's character that I really admired about him. One night, Rich and I were doing our best to court two young Russian beauties. And just for the record, they were nowhere near as beautiful as you, Audrey. And we were in a restaurant somewhere outside of Moscow. And there also happened to be a wedding taking place right next to us in this restaurant. Russian weddings, in those days at least, appear to be fairly rowdy affairs. And at a table right near us, a great commotion broke out, and a table was upturned, and people were jumping up, and waitstaff were running around. One of the young ladies at our table went to jump up. Rich just casually gestured for her to sit back down. He took the champagne, topped up all of our drinks. We clinked glasses, and Rich just continued with the conversation without batting an eyelid. That was Rich at his calm, rational best, and I love that about him. Another story, which is a little long, so I'm going to give a very condensed version. We were somewhere in eastern Turkey. The general sleeping arrangements each night were that I'd sleep in my car and Rich would sleep in his tent, although he mostly just slept on the ground in a swag thing that he had. In fact, somewhere amongst the photographs that I've sent in, there's a photograph of Rich sleeping rough on the ground. And I just would like to state for the record that for all the places Richard visited me after that in life, I always did manage to find him a bed inside the house. However, on this particular night in eastern Turkey, I was woken up in the middle of the night by muffled voices and shocked to see two shadowy figures right by my car. I kicked open the tailgate and yelled for Rich that he was okay, and he jumped up and yelled out that he was all right, and Shady and his mate ran off into the night. The next morning we found that they'd slashed the tyre in my car with a knife. It was while I was changing the tyre that I saw these two guys coming around the bend on a motorbike. We were in the middle of nowhere and we were well hidden from the road, and I knew that they were the guys. I said to Rich, that's them, 100% that's them. So I stormed off to confront them with Rich in tow. And so I'm there angrily and, in hindsight, quite stupidly, shaking my fist in these guys' faces and pointing to my slashed tyre. Now, Rich was many things, but he was not a scrapper. Eventually, Shady and his mate, they left, and I turned around, and there's Rich, God love him. He's got his sleeves pulled up, his fists clenched, standing a little ways back, and he says, "I was ready, Craig, I was ready to go." And that's what I loved about him. He was always very enthusiastic and very supportive, even if it was from a very safe distance. Rich, my friend, you have always been in my head. Our conversations will continue, and you will always be in my head. Your memory, your laugh, our experiences together will always be with me. Goodbye, my dearest friend. Thank you.
Hello everyone and greetings from Berlin. I'm very sorry I can't be with you today in person to remember Richard and to celebrate his life that's due to quarantine regulations. I still cannot believe that Richard is gone, and it will take me a very long time to come to terms with his sudden and untimely death. I'm sure Matthias and many others will highlight the huge role Richard played in the School of History as an inspirational and extremely popular teacher, and as an extremely kind and supportive colleague. We will all miss his cheerfulness and devotion, and the department won't be the same without him. But to me, Richard was more than a colleague. He was one of my very best friends and always looked after me like a big brother. Richard's laughter and Artery's goodies made the many long and tiring evenings in the office bearable. He always looked after my flat when I was in Berlin and made sure the fridge was full upon my return. He taught me how to drive on the left, and we shared many great memories on our trips to various conferences, from Augsburg to Barcelona and Paris to Passau. He always enjoyed traveling and meeting new people at those events, and I still remember the annoying bedbugs in his shabby Amsterdam hotel where we shared a room, or how we got stuck in Salerno in southern Italy because of the volcano in Iceland, making the best of the situation and exploring the Amalfi Coast, Pompeii and Naples together. But words cannot express how much Richard meant to me. He gave so much and expected nothing in return. I will always be grateful for his friendship, his kindness and loyalty. Goodbye, Richard. Mach's gut, altes Haus.
Hello, family and friends. For those who don't know me yet, I am Carla van der Kolf, who lives in Stellenbosch, South Africa. I am making this video for Uncle Richard's funeral. I didn't know Uncle Richard very well, but the bit I had to do with him was great. One of the things I enjoyed a lot was to text and voice note him. He always replied in a very friendly manner. His answers was sometimes quite interesting, especially the Afrikaans part. Uncle Richard was kind-hearted and he cared about his family. It is a pity that I will not get the chance to know him a bit better. His friendly voice will be missed. Rest in peace.
Okay, many heartfelt messages and memories and reflections. I would like now invite everyone to grab a glass from the catering, from the bar, and we will invite anyone who wants to say a few words to come forward, and we will then finish the speeches part with a toast to Richard, and then everyone can mingle, talk, and have some of Audrey's famous cake. So please grab a glass, and if anyone wants to say a few words, then please come over to me while people are gathering to get a glass. All right, then. I think everyone had a chance to get a glass. Could I just have your attention for 5 more minutes, please? Hello? Could I just have your attention for 5 more minutes, please? We have just 2 very short people who want to say something. We have a student here, and we also have our UCU president. So I first invite you to come forward.
Hello, my name is Tom, and I'm just one of the many students that has sort of had the pleasure of being taught by Richard. So over my last 4 years at UEA, Richard has been a constant in every part of my life. From making time to listen to me when personal difficulties were arising, to spontaneously turning up at my uni house and dropping off books that I needed to finish off an essay. Richard was one of the most passionate and hard-working individuals that I've had the pleasure of knowing. His tireless dedication to the students and his studies has driven me to where I am today, studying a master's in history at UEA and following my heart in doing what I love. I've had the pleasure of being taught by him in every year, including modules such as history, controversy and debate, modern Germany, the Cold War, and most recently, my specialist tutorial on the Holocaust. The enthusiasm in which he taught was incomparable to anything I've ever had before. The way he was able to captivate myself and other students alongside stimulating, natural and heated discussions was really an image for us all to live by. Not only did he explain and narrate the experiences of everyone in the module, he challenged me and pushed me to understand an unexpected depth which I hadn't seen before. His gentle encouragement and yes, his long feedback pushed me to attempt things outside of my comfort zone. Richard was not only a lecturer to his students, he was a close friend. He offered guidance, certainty, and enthusiasm to every aspect of our academic lives. Without his extraordinary passion for his extended university family, I would not still be at UEA today. Richard was a beating heart of the history community at UEA, and a real testament to what we can all achieve in our lives. I know I speak for the whole school and all of the students in saying that his gentleness and his presence will be gravely missed. Thank you.
My name's Ben. It was my privilege to be Richard's trade union rep for many years. Like many people who we've heard from today, My first memorable encounter with Richard was when he helped me out. I was about to miss a marking deadline by a significant margin during a time when my mental health was very poor. With zero notice, Richard stepped in and marked what must have been dozens of student essays. I was bowled over, not just by his generosity and kindness, but by the care and comprehensiveness of the feedback that he provided. I came to understand that this was typical of Richard. He was someone you could rely on in a crisis, someone who brought scholarly integrity, a friendly sociability, and a commitment to everyday acts of kindness to all those he came in contact with. Later, when I became union rep for the school, I was not surprised to learn that Richard had been heavily involved in campaigning to improve the security, pay and contractual conditions of other associate tutors on casual contracts. As Richard's own contractual situation improved, he continued to make meaningful and memorable contributions to collective action. He was, for example, a vocal and vital force on picket lines during the recent series of strikes, a task he tackled with infectious enthusiasm. Not for Richard, the diffident, sometimes embarrassed English approach. Colleagues, students, and members of the public would be loudly exhorted to support the strike in what I'm going to call his warm Canadian tones. Thanks to Richard Mills for that. Any cyclist who Richard had not managed to talk to, leaflet, or otherwise engage personally would be encouraged to give us a ring on your bell to the cheers of fellow picketers. Richard simply refused to believe that anything or anyone was a lost cause. I mean, he was a Norwich City fan, for Christ's sake. Be it in an industrial dispute where the odds of a satisfactory outcome looked increasingly bleak, a student needing guidance and extra support, or a colleague struggling with a new role or piece of research, he was unendingly generous with his expertise and with his time. In this belief, and in his countless acts of everyday kindness, Richard gave shape and meaning to famously nebulous words like community and solidarity. We will feel his loss for years to come. Thank you.
Right, thank you then, everyone, and Ben and Tom for these really heartfelt reflections. I would like to bring the speeches part to a close now by doing a toast to Richard. Let's raise our glasses to our friend, colleague, teacher. You will be sorely missed, Richard. You will always be remembered. Rest in peace, my friend. To Richard. And please stay around and have some more drinks. There is some food now provided, and also, of course, make sure that you try some of Audrey's famous cake. Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for everyone joining in online. I think we had more than 100 people on the live stream. Thank you.